So for me, I was just excited to go learn something new. No matter where you are and where you went to law school, and we're kind of used to being one of the smartest people in the room. Being willing to admit that you don't know something for many lawyers can be very challenging.
All right. Welcome to the You Are Lawyer podcast. Elise Holtzman, how are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing well. So, Elise, I was so excited to hear from you. And I was like, yeah, of course I'll talk to you. Like, let's talk about all the things. I want to talk about the lawyer's edge. I want to talk about starting businesses. I want to talk about you serving lawyers, but not practicing as an attorney right now. So, like, all the stuff. Would you start us off with just an introduction and just what you do every day?
Sure. So I am a former practicing lawyer, obviously, and I am the founder and CEO of a small company called The Lawyer's Edge. And basically, what we do here is all training and educational programs for lawyers, as well as a tremendous amount of lawyer coaching. So, executive coaching for lawyers, both individual coaching and group programs. And we do it primarily in the areas of business development because nobody ever bothered teaching us that stuff in law school, and leader development, because what happens is, especially as lawyers become more senior, they start having to take on more management roles, leadership roles, and they don't know how to do that either. And so, we're not critical of lawyers. We understand why they don't have the rainmaking skills, why they don't have the leadership skills. So our role is to help them develop those skills, develop the mindset, start taking the action, and start to put together some behaviors and habits that help them enjoy what they're doing more, feel more comfortable doing it, and basically create a really great environment in their law firms.
Yeah. So, how did you decide that this is what you wanted to do? Were you struggling in these areas and then you found like a coach and a mentor, and so now you want to bring that to other people?
It's kind of a different story than that. So I was pre-med in college, and I thought I wanted to go to medical school. I think I thought my choices were basically doctor or lawyer based on how I grew up. My parents were very into the education and have a trade and not ever have to rely on a company, not ever have to rely on a man, all that kind of thing. And so I wound up realizing almost at the end of college that that wasn't a good fit. And I didn't grow up with lawyers around me, but I started looking into it a little bit and decided that that would be a better fit for me. And it was. So I went to law school. I can't say I was madly in love with everything that happened in law school, but it was definitely the right place for me to be. Started practicing law. And long story short, I mean, this was, I had been practicing law for a while. I was the most senior associate at my practice group doing commercial real estate transactions in Manhattan at a big law firm. So, the hours were crazy. And I'm married to a big law lawyer as well. And then we started having kids. And the whole house of cards just started to come down because, there was no such thing as part time. I mean, none of the things, there was no such thing as a coach. There was no such thing as a woman mentor. I didn't really know senior women who had had families and had made it in the law as a woman partner. And so at some point, my husband and I looked at each other and we're like, okay, something's got to give. So I wound up grudgingly leaving the practice of law. Fast forward with 3 kids, was home with my kids for a while, never in a million years thought I would be doing that. Even my kids say that mom was born in a suit carrying a briefcase, right? They think it's crazy that I was home for that long. But I did start looking for what am I going to do next? And while I really did love practicing law, I was at a point in my life where I didn't feel like I could turn my life over to somebody else, which is what I had felt that I was doing at a big law firm. I really didn't have experiences with smaller firms, so I didn't know what was possible. At the time, we were living on next to nothing because we were all of a sudden living on half of our income. I mean, my husband and I were basically making the same amount of money. I was actually making slightly more than he was because I met him when I was a 3L, he was a 1L. So yeah, so we managed to figure it out, but then I was home for 10 years with these kids and I didn't have an income. So then it became easier. Like I was fortunate in that respect that it was easier for me to start my coaching business because if I didn't bring in a lot of money, no one was starving to death. I found out about coaching in a book. I was just reading everything I could get my hands on, found out that there was this thing called executive coaching, leadership coaching. And I thought, wow, this sounds like a combination of everything I would love and everything that I'm good at. And so I pursued that. I took a full year certificate program in it, became a certified professional coach, and then started the Lawyer's Edge. I did not know what I was doing with the Lawyer's Edge, by the way, at the beginning. But then over time, it evolved into this because I found out that what I love doing most is helping other people succeed.
I love to hear that. I was at home with our daughter. I have a 4-year-old. So she was born June 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic. And then we had to be home with her for 18 months. What was that like when you went from running an office, running people, to then managing your house, which is, I would say, as much work, just work in a different way? How was that transition for you?
Let me tell you something. Nobody could have been more like clueless than I was. It really was a shock. And I sort of remember when I left, we moved because we moved from New York City to New Jersey because we couldn't actually afford to stay in the city. We were actually making almost the same amount of money. So we were losing actually something like 51% of our income because when I met my husband, I was a 3L, he was a 1L. So when you're at the law firms, the big law firms, you're kind of working in lockstep. So because he was 2 years behind me, I was actually making more money than he was. And there was this minor argument of like, well, why don't you leave the workforce instead of me leaving the workforce? But it was the late 90s. That just wasn't happening. So we moved to the suburbs, and now all of a sudden I am, my husband stayed home for the day. We moved. He stayed home the next day. He goes back to work. And there I am standing in the kitchen with a baby who was almost 2 years old. I had basically never spent that much time alone with her. So now all of a sudden, I'm in a town. We don't know anybody. I don't know where the supermarket is. I don't know how to take care of a whole household. I've never been alone with this kid for 24/7. I just remember, and also the week we moved in, the whole air conditioning system died. And we didn't have the money to fix it. Like it was a whole situation, but it was the end of July and it must have been 90 degrees in the house. And so I'm standing there with this baby in a diaper, wearing, a tank top and shorts and crying. Like I'm not even joking. I was so upset. But you know what? I think it's like anything else. When you're a lawyer, you're competent, you're organized, you know how to research, you know how to get things done. So I started researching, where to find friends and where to find activities for her and how to run your household. And so I just wound up doing it. And I think for me personally, everybody's different. I was torn. People say to me, "Well, what was it like for you leaving and then all of a sudden be home with an almost 2-year-old all day?" And it was a mixed bag. I'll be honest. It was on the one hand, I was annoyed. I hadn't really wanted to give up the practice of law. I loved what I was doing and I had had this very, committed to my education. On the other hand, I was fully aware that most women did not have the luxury, if you will, of staying home with a baby because most people need two incomes to survive. And so there were times for me that I loved being home and times for me where it felt like a little bit like watching paint dry. Because if you're outside in the suburbs by yourself with a 2-year-old trying to entertain her, at least for me, not that exciting every minute. So then I threw myself into volunteer work. So I was raising kids and doing a tremendous amount of volunteer work before I decided to get back into the workforce.
Okay. All right, cool. So yeah, you had all the transitions at one time.
I really
Staying
did.
at home, left the city, in a new town, no friends. Okay. One of the things that I find to be most challenging, at least about being a lawyer, is how hard it is to start over and becoming a beginner, right? Because although we don't know anything when we leave law school, we have the theory and we have this piece of paper behind us, right? And so being a mom, don't know anything. Watching other people parent is not the same as parenting at all. What was it like when you were being a coach for the first time? How did you give yourself permission to change and become a coach?
That's a great question. I think that I knew that I needed something else other than taking care of my kids to be a good mom. So that was to start with. And sometimes people ask me, what made you decide to stop being a full-time mom, exclusively and go and do something else? And I only half jokingly say to keep from smothering my children in their sleep. I mean, so don't get me wrong. I love my children. I have amazing kids. And again, I'm grateful and I wouldn't give that time back for anything, but I really needed something intellectual. And you talked about this idea of having it be hard sometimes for lawyers to go back to that beginner mindset. And I think a lot of it is because we are so highly educated, and all lawyers, no matter where you are and where you went to law school and what your geography, we're kind of used to being one of the smartest people in the room, right? We went to law school, we did well in college, we went to a great college because we did well in high school, and so we're used to that. And so being willing to admit that you don't know something for many lawyers can be very challenging. So for me, I was just excited to go learn something new. And I'm glad that I took a full year of coach training because, coaching is not a licensed profession. Unlike therapy, psychology, lawyering, whatever it may be, it's not a licensed profession. And so what that means is that anybody who wants to can just hang out a shingle and call herself a coach. I liked the idea that because again, I'm a lawyer, I like structure and I'm also master certified in a set of personality tools. And I really do show up almost with the full lawyer personality. If I were an introvert, which I'm not, I'm a strong extrovert. If I were an introvert, I would really have that very classic lawyer personality. And what we know about many of those folks is that they like structure. They like to know what they are supposed to know. And so I really enjoyed going through that coaching program. I hadn't been in any kind of educational program for a long time. I loved learning. It gave me a little break from what I was doing at home. And so then there was this hesitation, like, okay, I've got this coaching certificate. Does that mean I actually know anything? And does that mean I know how to coach people? And so I started out with, I would coach anybody with a pulse. Checkbook was optional and they didn't have to be a lawyer. Because in the beginning, I actually didn't even know I was doing lawyers. My business wasn't called The Lawyer's Edge in the beginning. And then the checkbook became slightly more optional as I got more comfortable with it. So I did a lot of free coaching in the beginning with people that I would meet. I mean, I remember I met one woman literally getting pedicures. I met this woman sitting there. I was like, I'll coach you. So I got my experience that way and then realized very quickly that I needed to work with people who were highly educated, who were highly driven, and over time, developed confidence. But I think part of it is understanding that as a coach, you don't have to know everything. And by the way, as a lawyer, you don't have to know everything. As a coach, though, you certainly don't have to know everything. You don't have to have walked the same path as the person that you're coaching. You simply have to be open enough and willing to learn and willing to listen and use the tools of coaching to help the person figure out what they're going for. So once I started getting more comfortable with that, then it took off from there. And I developed the confidence that I needed to really be able to help other people.
Yeah. I think this story is so fascinating. Structured lawyer, big law lawyer at that, which is a completely different breed. I worked in big law as well. It's a very specific type. And then you started coaching anyone, very altruistic, very empathetic, the counselor at law side. And then your niche kind of found itself, like it found you. It was like, well, the best way to kind of marry both of your worlds, you enjoy the structure and the training, and you coaching people that enjoy structure and training probably makes sense. I think that's kind of fascinating.
Yeah, I kind of felt that I wanted to be I wanted to be able to speak the language of my clients. And so, for example, I coached an engineer. I coached a woman. The woman I met in the nail salon was a car saleswoman, right? She was working at a big dealership. And so, and she wanted to advance in her career. And so we were talking about a lot of the same things, but I realized pretty quickly that one of the ways that I could be helpful and also have credibility with my audience, have credibility with my target market is to work with people whose world I understand. That's been a good fit for me. And I think for them, I think it's been helpful to most lawyers that I do speak their language, understand what they got from law school, and more importantly, what they didn't learn in law school, right? Which is a big part of the challenges that some lawyers run into.
Yeah. Okay. So, what made you decide to create the Lawyer's Edge podcast? Where did that fit into your goals? And did you ever expect to become a podcaster?
Oh my gosh, absolutely not. I certainly didn't grow up in a podcast world, right? I'm quite a bit older than you are. And so, I really didn't know much about podcasts. I knew they existed. But while you were busy doing, a Herculean task and giving birth in the pandemic, I was busy sitting here thinking to myself, oh my God, what am I doing? Business dried up for a while as law firms tried to figure out what was going to happen, right? So all of a sudden, everybody shut down their budgets. Everybody got nervous. We know that ultimately things worked out pretty well, but that was not a foregone conclusion at the beginning. And also, I am such a strong extrovert. I love interacting with people, and I'm sitting here by myself thinking, my God, what am I going to do? So I thought, well, one way would be if I could just get on Zoom calls with people all the time and just have really cool conversations with fun people. Also, obviously, I was also looking to grow my business. So I wanted to develop relationships with cool people in the legal profession. And so I thought, I wonder what this would look like. I started looking into it. I was kind of terrified. I didn't know anything. I mean, I joke with people. It's like I spend time with my 80-something-year-old parents trying to help them with technology. And then my kids roll their eyes and they're like, Mom, seriously? Like you, of all people? Um, exactly. And I'm like, oh my God, my parents just don't get it. They're like, yes, that's what we say about you. But I thought, I feel like I can learn anything, right? If I want to learn something, I can learn. And also, you don't have to do it all yourself. So I wound up hiring an outside podcast producer where I just got to get on calls with people, ask them cool questions, have great conversations with people, far smarter than I am, who are having different experiences than I am. And so that was how it got started. And my first episode was a disaster. The guy that I interviewed, he was nervous. He had never done it before. I had never done it before. We got to the end of the episode and agreed that it was going in the garbage. And after I had about 20 or 30 under my belt, I then called him back. I said, okay, we're good to go. And we had a great episode. But that's kind of how it all started. And now I have 170 plus episodes, and I love it. I'm so fortunate. I really enjoy talking to really cool people.
Yeah, I my full-time job is launching podcasts for other people, but I work in different disciplines. So I work with like a dermatologist and an architect and all these structured people who are too busy to focus on the podcast. So I literally tell them when to show up. I write their questions, I find the guests, I do all this stuff, they
Oh,
record,
wow.
and I get to. But I found that I actually enjoy the coaching part more, right? Because I coach them for about 4 months and then it goes into management where I just run the show. And I was like, I miss the coaching part. I miss giving them that light bulb moment when they're like, oh, it makes sense. So,
That's
Elise,
interesting. Yeah, there's a need for it for sure.
yeah, well, the thing is, there's so many different things that I'm interested in. So I don't know if it would be like podcast coaching, or I'm leaning towards being a trust coach because I find that so many people negotiate with themselves and they don't actually trust their own like intuition and voice. But with that said, what made you decide to take a formal program? Like not to just say, "Hey, I know all of this stuff. I read all the books. I'm a coach." Why did you want that extra little feather in your cap?
I think part of it was that because I'm a lawyer and because I was so highly educated, the idea of starting to do something and just calling myself something and saying I could do it, that was actually scary to me. Like I really don't think I knew what coaching was. And I'll give you an example. The first weekend of coach training, the trainer, there were about 40 of us in the room, and it was everything back then. It was, executive coaches, somebody like me, somebody who wanted to be a spirituality coach. I mean, you had everything in the room. There were about 40 of us in there. So this is going back 17 years ago. And the trainer was fantastic. And he said, okay, how many of you are here because you're really good at giving advice? And 40 hands went up. And he said, okay, that's not what coaching is. And you could feel the air get sucked out of the room because coaching really isn't about giving advice, right? That's something different. That could be potentially consulting. And so I felt that the confidence for me would come from knowing a process. And of course, I've changed it up over the years. And of course, you make it your own. I don't just coach the way they taught me to coach at all. But back then, I didn't even know what it meant. And so I think also, when you're a lawyer, it's like you join the bar association and you take continuing legal education. And I thought, well, if I'm going to do this thing, I'm going to get educated. So that was it for me. It was less about having a feather in my cap and more about like, okay, I want to do this thing, but I have absolutely no idea what I'm talking about.
That's fascinating because I never worked with a coach until after I started this podcast and I had probably interviewed my 18th coach. I'm talking executive coaches, high achieving coaches, like career pivot coaches. And so I had talked to so many of them and I was like, I wonder if I could use a coach. And I've fallen in love with coaching. It's like a whole line item in my budget. I'm like, I have to have money set aside for coaching.
Well, that's a really great way of looking at it because, and I have a coach too, right? It's like if you believe in coaching, you believe in coaching. And even if you're coaching other people, you have your own head trash and, your own limitations and obstacles and things like that and your own goals. So I'll just throw this out there for anybody who's listening, might be interested in having their own coach or becoming a coach. There is, because it's not a licensed profession, the primary self-regulating body of the coaching profession is the International Coaching Federation. They have more than 50,000 members in 150 countries. I mean, this is how coaching has taken hold globally. And so they accredit coach training programs. They have credentials you can earn, things like that. There's continuing coach education, all of that kind of thing. So it's out there if you want it, but there are coaches that don't do that and they can still be really great coaches. This is just the path that I chose.
Yeah, I think that's so great. I mean, I started this podcast because I've met two lawyers who were absolutely phenomenal and they weren't practicing, right? I met a data analyst and then I met an accountant in my big law firm. And I was like, so you're not practicing, but you're displaying your degree. And
Right.
she's like, yeah. And I'm like, what? How many other lawyers are choosing not to practice or are doing cool things with their degree? And I mean, like, you're a prime example. You chose to leave, even though begrudgingly, you had this entirely different life. You gave yourself permission to change your mind. Because for me, I left Big Law in 2021. So it was on my own terms, but I still hadn't accepted the fact that I was a creative person. I hadn't accepted the fact that, oh, I'm a podcaster and people are paying me to podcast. Oh, people are paying me for ads and sponsored. I still just said, I'm Kyla who does this every now and then, right?
Oh, yeah.
So the fact that like you chose these things is so inspiring to me. And I feel like the audience is really going to love it because it was hard for me to decide to change my mind. Like I was on this path and then the path kind of like I had my daughter and she was so cool. And I was like, I want to hang out with her more, right? I remember I was sitting because I used to train and manage paralegals. And so I'm sitting on my laptop and I'm watching her crawl to the stove and stand up. Like nothing was turned on, but I was like, look at what I'm missing for an email. And it was literally that quick.
Well, sometimes listen, sometimes, sometimes it is like that. It's like a switch. And, for me, I was home for a long time and wasn't working, so I think it took me longer, but the switch did go when I saw that, "Oh my gosh, this coaching thing exists," that's when the light bulb went on for me. But it is hard to make a shift when you're a lawyer to something else, unless you're miserable, right? There are lawyers who are just miserable and they're like, "You know what? I made this choice. It's not a good fit for me." And they try something else. And I give them credit because look, there are a lot of sunk costs there. Law school's not cheap. And we spent a lot of years and opportunity costs and all of that sort of thing. But I think that, there are so many things that lawyers are doing now. And I'll tell you this one quick story just about accepting it. When I found coaching, I did not discuss it with anybody. I didn't even discuss it with my husband because I thought, you went to college, you went to law school, you had loans, you paid off, like all of this stuff. You're now going to go be a coach? Like it just sounded back then so utterly ridiculous to me. I finally mentioned it to my husband. He could not have been more supportive. And when I was a little nervous to bring it up with my parents, and I should have known better. So I brought it up with my parents and they said, "Wow, this sounds absolutely fantastic. Like, do you like the idea? Do you think you're going to enjoy it?" Yeah. We're just as proud of you as if you did this other thing. So I think that we have to give ourselves that permission that just because you choose something when you're 22 years old doesn't mean you have to do it for the rest of your life.
We do. And I mean, it's definitely easier said than done. So if you're listening to this and you're a law student or a young lawyer and you're just like, but how did you do it? But how? But okay, you made the decision, but then how did you tell other people? Contact Elise. I'll put her information in the episode notes. Feel free to reach out to me as well. And Elise, just really quick before we go, what's one piece of advice you would give to young lawyers or law students about what they can do with their law degree?
You mean other than being a lawyer?
Yes, yes.
You know what? Here's what I'll say about that. So, it may be a slightly longer answer than you're going for, but so one of my kids is actually in law school right now, and she has this very kind of esoteric interest in this particular area of the law that just kind of came naturally out of some of the things she was studying when she was in college. And what I will say is, for people who haven't gone to law school yet, if they're listening, don't go to law school just to park yourself there. My generation, some of us were like, we don't know what we want to do with ourselves. We're going to go sit in law school for 3 years. It's really expensive. And, again, you're not earning money for those 3 years unless you're going part time. So that's not a good idea. But once you have the law degree, understand that there's so many options out there. Like all I knew was I had a ton of loans to pay off. I didn't come from, money or anything like that where it was going to be easy. I had to get it done. So I went to a big law firm because I knew I could make a lot of money there. I didn't know that most lawyers are in smaller law firms. I didn't even know what it meant to be in-house. I didn't know about things like solicitors general and attorneys general. I mean, I knew because I learned in law school, but it was like, no, go to a big law firm. So I think that part of it is doing the research, especially if you don't come from a family where, when you go to your Thanksgiving event, there are 13 lawyers sitting at the table. When you don't know, do the research. Don't feel pigeonholed, right? Your mind is needed. Businesses, startups need you. Not for profits need you, companies need you. I do work primarily with private practice lawyers, but I've worked with so many different types of lawyers over the year and run into so many different types of lawyers. Also, the younger generation is more willing to move around to get the experience that they want. I mean, my husband's a lifer. He did a federal clerkship in the Southern District of New York. He went to his law firm. He's been there ever since. That's not the way the world is anymore. So I think just being open-minded and not feeling like you have to get pigeonholed into one thing is really important. And so I think that people can stay in the law longer if they just get a little bit creative. And also, the world's an open book now. I mean, everything's on Google, everything's on AI. We didn't have those research tools back then. It was kind of, did you know somebody you could talk to about it? And so just, be open-minded, do the research, experiment, be curious, lead with curiosity, and you'll find what you want to do.
Yeah. I know I said that was the last question, but I have one more baby one. Did you expect to raise someone who would go to law school, or were you like against it?
No, we didn't push it. We definitely didn't talk about it. We didn't raise it. She started raising it. She has an older sister who is completely different personality wise. She would never be interested in law school. And then this one came along. And I'm not joking. When she was 3 years old, people would say, "Oh, haha, is she going to be a lawyer?" And we're like, "No, no, 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 no. Like, we're not pushing that. We know what this is like." And when she said she thought she might want to do it, we said, the first thing is you don't go straight through. We wanted her to get out. We both went straight through, and we wish that we had had some life experience and some work experience before. So she worked for a couple of years before she went to law school. And then we said to her, what would be your plan? Doesn't have to stay the same forever, but at this point, what's the reasoning behind going to law school? And it wasn't like, I don't know what else to do with myself, and a law degree is a good thing to have. She had specific reasoning for what she wanted to do with it that made sense, that we thought that she could actually make a career out of it if she wanted to. So we got very practical with her, and she is a very practical kid. But, we definitely talked to her about it. And we were not just jumping on the bandwagon right away, because it's not an easy profession to be in. It can be very, very rewarding. I love being with lawyers, working with lawyers. My husband still loves practicing law. I'm not one of these people that's down on the profession. But it's a slog, and it requires tremendous hard work, regardless of how much money you make. And so we wanted to make sure that she was making a reasoned decision.
Yeah. Okay. I love that. That's so good. I would be very surprised if my daughter ended up being a lawyer, but I have a little bit of time to think about that.
Yeah, just a few years.
Just a few. All right. Well, thank you so much, Elise. So, everyone, make sure you check out the Lawyer's Edge podcast. So, thank you so much, Elise. You have a great day.
Thanks, you too. Thanks for having me.
Bye.
Bye bye.